listening to This Won't Fix You. I'm your host, Nadine, and this show is a curation of interesting models, metaphors and images discovered or manifested through my work as an accredited psychotherapist. You can expect to hear nifty ideas, clever language and thought-provoking ways of looking at life. Each episode, you'll get one of two alternating perspectives. First, a conversation which introduces and discusses the theory or idea, and we call this the A side, and then the B side, which, while not therapy, is a deeper exploration of that theory or idea from a more therapeutic standpoint. Hello, now, before I start, let me ask you a question. Have you ever, while listening to this podcast, had a penny drop moment? I've certainly had a few while I've been researching it and chatting with the fellow co-hosts for the A-sides. But the thing is, if you've had a penny drop moment, I would absolutely love to have your help. So if you agree with me, that is, if you agree that this podcast has offered you a penny drop moment, or a moment where you thought, blimey, that was really interesting, or you've had a kind of aha moment, then please can I ask you to do one thing for me. I'd like you to pause this episode right now and share that episode, the one that moved you the most. Share it with somebody who you think would like the content too. Thank you very much. That's all for now, and on to the episode. I loved the way that Johnny in the A-side talked about how behaviours can align or not align with our life goals. Once we establish what our life goals are, then we can hold our behaviours up alongside those goals to see how our behaviours are faring, because therapy doesn't change all of us. It doesn't change every bit of us. In therapy, we only change what it is that we want to change. And so it's important that you know what your life goals are, and then you can hold your behaviours up alongside that to see, is this behaviour supporting or hindering my arrival at this life goal? And what I want to pick up on specifically in this B side is the bit that came after this bit in the A side. There was a part of the conversation where Johnny and I discussed changing behaviours in order to change how we feel, as in kind of front-loading it. He called it opposite action. It's a well-used CBT and DBT technique. If we accept that there's a connection between thoughts, feelings and behaviours, that kind of holy trinity, thoughts, feelings and behaviours, that each one influences the other two in the triangle, then of course if we change one, then the other two will change too. Change our feelings, then our thoughts and behaviours change. If we change our behaviours, then our thoughts and feelings change. So, for example, if we feel anxious about flying, then we can, behaviour, stop the flying, or we can, thoughts, use statistics to change the way that our thoughts relate to flying. So we could look into the fact that it's the safest way to travel. And that in turn could have an impact on how we feel about flying. And in the A side, I asked Johnny what happens then to the emotional fallout from the change of our behaviours if all we do is just behave differently. He had used the example of a jealous lover. So if you feel jealous when your partner talks with someone else at a party, then instead of behaving in a jealous way, he said, try to behave in the opposite way and allow or even encourage your partner to talk with other people at parties. And I was intrigued by this because I wondered what happens then to the emotional fallout of doing that. Does the jealousy just go away if we behave differently, or does the jealousy remain festering inside us? Then we might behave correctly, but we'll be swamped by reactivity coming from that inherent sense of fear that we are trying to just ignore, just to overlay with different behaviours. So it won't matter how well we behave, because we'll still feel terrified that we're going to lose them, if indeed fear is the emotion that sits underneath. It could, of course, be anything. It could be any number of things. For instance, if my partner is talking to somebody else at a party, yes, I could be frightened I'm going to lose them, or I might be frightened that I'm going to be humiliated. That's another quite common response as well. And so that terror or that humiliation or whatever it is could manifest as something more dangerous, such as anger, potentially a violent anger. As anger itself is not violent, it's the expressions of anger, sometimes violent, that can be dangerous. So one task that we have to undertake is to look at how we feel and ask if it aligns with our life goals. So if one of my life goals is that I want to be in a trusting relationship, and I'm not excluding polyamory from this conversation, there is of course still trust in polyamorous relationships. If one of my life's goals is that I want to be in a trusting relationship, then we need to sit with anything that gets in the way of that goal. any feeling that gets in the way of that goal. What's in the way of my relationship being a trusting one, as in within me? And if you can allow it, you have to sit with that cringe. I say this over and over again. I say this over and over again. We have to sit with things. We have to pull them forward. We have to investigate them. And the key bit is that we have to investigate them with curiosity rather than judgment, because we'll be rewarded with much richer conclusions and insight that will help make meaningful change than if we just sit there and say, we're a bad person because of this, that and the other. And of course, if you're struggling to pull into your awareness or sit with something, then therapy would be an excellent course of action. And as always, I try to keep things as light as I can in these episodes so as not to trigger anybody too much. So let me explain in more detail, because what we're looking for here is whether the thing that you feel when you're sitting with it is helpful to your life's goal or unhelpful. And so let me assume that I have behaved in a way that has led me to feel guilty. Because that guilt can be helpful. I mean, it can be a hindrance too, but actually guilt can be helpful. Healthy guilt, for want of a better phrase, can actually help us to kickstart changes in our behaviours. Brené Brown defines the difference between guilt and shame as: guilt is I did something bad, shame is I am bad. So if I've done something that is bad and I feel guilt, then that's worth sitting with. And it's really important here that I do not ever praise or value shame as a constant state. I do not value anybody sitting in a place of self-loathing as a result of something that they did, said, or thought. And I will actually come back to this a little bit later. If we let feelings of guilt, or indeed any emotion, guide us, then we can potentially be led to behaving more in line with our life goals. So anger, if we listen to it, for example, can be a great catalyst for understanding how we've been hurt or neglected. But, and this is another key bit, we have to bear in mind that the pain might be displaced. That anger that we feel in that moment might be displaced. Almost all pain that we feel in the presence of somebody in our lives now is a direct result of ways that we've been hurt in the past, and it is our brain just using that past experience to predict what's going to happen in this instance, in this relationship, right here, right now. Which is why therapy looks so much to the past, because it's looking to find those blueprints, pull them forward, investigate them, and hopefully heal them. So if I'm jealous that my partner is talking to someone else at a party, this could mean that I'm frightened that I'm going to lose my partner, which could mean that I'm frightened I'm going to be abandoned. Maybe that means that I've been abandoned in my past, and not by this person who I'm angry with now, necessarily. Can I allow the feelings of fear to be within me so that I can find out where they come from, and then deal with that original fear? If I didn't get to my fears in time and I behaved badly in that moment, Johnny uses the example of throwing a pan at my partner, but we can do lots of things that are lesser and greater than that, of course. So if I behave badly and I feel bad about it, that guilt can be a great catalyst for apology, for repair, for healing. So we feel jealous because our partner talked with someone else at a party, or maybe we feel guilty about the way that we treated them as a result of that jealousy. And a good therapist will get underneath that jealousy and that guilt and help you work out whether this is a healthy kind, encouraging us to make amends. And if so, then it will be uncomfortable, quite likely, because it's encouraging you to do something about it, to face it. But not all guilt is healthy. And here I come back to that point I mentioned earlier, because sometimes we feel guilty for something that we needn't feel guilty for at all. Because not all guilt contradicts our life's goals. Sometimes we want to do something or behave in a certain way, or we can find ourselves in situations where we are behaving in ways that maybe some people in society don't like. And that can send us into a spiral of self-loathing and unhealthy shame. But it might be because we think other people won't like it. Again, can we sit with it, investigate it? Is this behaviour conflicting with our goal, or what we imagine society's goals are for us? So let's bring in an example. Let's say that you are someone who is living with or loving or trying to help in some way a loved one who has an addiction. And if you're that person, I wonder if you're fearing that everybody else has an idea about how you should be managing the situation. Or of course, simply being a parent means that you're wide open to other people's comments about what you should be doing. So much so, it's incredibly difficult for people in these situations to not just disappear into their own heads, caught in a cycle of shame. So could this judgment have been ingested from society, or maybe our family of origin, as kind of how we should be? And of course, society's standards rarely take into account the complexities of being human. Society's standards are reductive and very, very binary. If you don't believe me, then look at the statistics for people who have affairs in our country. In the UK, 1 in 5 people have affairs, and they're just the ones that admit it on whatever surveys this information is garnered from. I've heard statistics like 33% of people have affairs. I think that's an American statistic, but not everybody who has an affair is doing it because it's fun. Some of those people are desperate in one way or another. Some are pulled in all sorts of different directions for all sorts of painful reasons, and not all of them are visible on the outside. As Helen Burrell says, sometimes the victim of the affair is not always the victim of the relationship. So your task, or your task in therapy anyway, is to establish which of these two guilts it is. Is it a contravention of my own values, or a contravention of my perception of what society's values are? And here's one thing that complicates things for us, because shame comes from a belief that I am bad, I'm inherently bad, from a failure to trust that we have an inherent goodness in us. And if we can't trust our inherent goodness, then when we make a mistake, we get psychologically fired off into a dark place where this thing that we did just becomes proof that we are indeed bad. And when we believe that we're bad, we're actually not especially able to change. It's actually quite a rigid perspective. We become either utterly self-destructive, where our only perception of ourselves is one of worthlessness, or we become defensive and fragile. And either way, we are not able to change who we are from that place. So the person who thinks that they are bad might well express jealous behaviour because, for example, they can't believe that anybody would really be with them. They believe deep, deep down that they're bad, then they can't believe, can they, that anybody else would really love them. How could you possibly love me? Maybe if you get too close, or if I let you too close, that you will soon discover the kind of inherent badness in me, even if I just let my guard down for a second. And like I explored in the B-side to Conceal, Don't Feel, the narratives that we hold about ourselves are the lens through which we view the world. So if we think we are bad, then we look for ways to prove it, because our brain works on prediction. So this shame, I'm bad, means that we use the decisions and narratives that we hold about ourselves as a template for how we interpret the world. And not quite finished yet, because we also hold on to how we are good too. And I mentioned this in the B-side to Conceal, Don't Feel as well. And that can also have a negative impact because, well, what if somebody doesn't see how good we are? I have an example for you. If I think I'm a good person, but maybe a situation arose where it was hard for me to settle my behaviours into those neat binary categories that I was talking about, maybe I get involved with somebody who demands a lot from me. Maybe I care about them so much. Maybe they see something in me that nobody's ever seen before, and we have a really unique bond. And it's very exciting. And because that's very exciting, I want to show them how much I care for them. So I show up when actually I haven't got the capacity to do so. I help them out when maybe I shouldn't be doing that, or I start answering their rallying calls and not really spending time with my partners or my friends or the people that I've kind of loved for years before. Maybe one of those partners or friends start to get upset that I'm not around as much as I used to be, but then I find myself trapped. Because whichever way I turn, I'm going to let somebody down. And it's easy to see, isn't it, how this situation could develop into something quite complex if we don't know how to deal with it. We end up with conflicting priorities because we care about this new person, but we also care about our old friends, our partners. And they don't demand as much from us as this new person. But there's something else in the mix here, which is this person sees me, values me. This person has connected to a part of me that has been dormant for years and years and years. So while I can see how my new relationship with this person is draining the life out of my pre-existing relationships, I just don't know how to help myself. I can't stop because, especially if this new person conveys a kind of helplessness without me, I might feel like a bit of a hero because I'm the only one who this person trusts. So our lives are so complex. Untangling situations like this takes several months in therapy, just to look at all the ways that I feel about all these people, and all the ways I feel about myself, and why this new person has such a hold over me. being a good person is an unhelpful bar to judge ourselves alongside. Does this align with my own goals is much more helpful. So thanks for that, Johnny. And of course, along the way, anyone involved could accuse you of being a bad person or being thoughtless. So this is my final point. Just because somebody thinks you're a bad person does not mean that you are one. Maybe that person is just making you who they need you to be to fit their narrative, because they've got their own narratives about the world. Of course, this doesn't mean that we should feel able to go around hurting people and not apologising. But what I mean is, know what it is that you're responsible for. Examine it and then face the world and all the accusations levelled at you from that place. So the key is trying to be open to the messages that we receive from other people, but not to trust them blindly. When you're accused of something, or labelled as something, either by yourself or by others, ask yourself, is this a fair accusation? Think about something that somebody has asked of you or accused you of being, and is that fair that they ask it of you? Maybe you think their accusations are fair, but it's just really hard to hear. That's okay, we don't have to find this stuff easy. As long as we're open to hearing where we have injured people, and we know the limits of our guilt and our shame, then we are connecting with the world from a place of truth. If you found this episode helpful, then do please share it with at least one other person that you think might be interested in it too. And until next time, take care. Bye. Thanks for listening. The next episode, which will be a conversation between myself and a co-host, will drop in a few weeks. In the meantime, if you'd like to have more of our conversations and metaphorical excavations, then, if you haven't already, do follow or subscribe to the podcast. And if you'd like to do me a favour, then I'd love it if you would share a favourite episode with a friend. See you again soon.